One of the biggest things that I learned in my career, I learned by doing. There was a VP role at a unicorn. The executive search firm recruiter asked me what my comp expectations were. And I said, I'm targeting 850K. And they smirked at me. And I could tell right away, they were like, this person is way too junior for this role. Today, we're going to be going deep into executive compensation and negotiation. Some examples of recent executive results that we've had are across three very different types of companies. Series B AI startup, a PE-backed, private equity-backed company, an SVP role, and a director at a top FAANG company that you definitely know. One increase they got was 440K for the C-suite role. A lot of that was equity, but the most important thing there that I'm going to talk about later is the things that were beyond compensation that we were able to negotiate for this person that are really important in VC-backed startups, like equity protections, severance, etc. For the PE-backed company, we only got 150K increase, but there was much bigger considerations there, like getting a big title bump, the scope and work relationships you want. All those things were really, really important to this person. And so it's not all about comp as well. And then for the director, they were able to go way above band and they got almost 100% increase in their offer from the original offer. Very rarely, it can happen during a period when they're really over hiring or where you have a very specialized skill set or an AI, those types of things. But we've been able to see anywhere from 200K to $1 million, in this case, increases in compensation at these very top roles for even just director. So the roles completely change once you get from IC to executive. And when I say executive broadly, I'm talking about director plus roles. When you're an IC or a senior IC or even a principal or staff, you can command some of the things in the executive. It's more of a spectrum, but you're mostly negotiating for base, bonus, equity, and it's pretty much recruiter and HR led. Once you become an executive, it becomes a bigger mix of things that you're able to negotiate. Base, bonus, equity, sign-on, severance, CIC protections, you got exercise terms, you can get creative cash compensation with milestone pay, a lot of things that people don't even know. A very simple one that you can negotiate even if you're non-executive, but that executives definitely should negotiate for, which is you only have usually 3 months or 90 days after you leave a company to be able to exercise your options if you have stock options. And sometimes that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars or even $1 million plus as an executive if you've been at the company for 4 or 6 years. And if you only have that 90-day exercise window, it can become a huge challenge. I had a CPO of a company who pretty much helped build this unicorn startup, and they were leaving and they couldn't come up with the cash easily, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a bet on illiquid stock. But in other cases, you're able to negotiate an exercise window that's not just 90 days, not like a year, but all the way up to 10 years we've been able to do. Your counterpart also changes. If you're in a VC or a PE-backed company, you're probably negotiating directly with the founder, CEO. You might be negotiating sometimes secondhand with the board. They're going to go to the board. They have to go to the CFO sometimes to get approvals for things instead of just the head HR or the comp committee. If you're at a big public company, there's other executives, there's the comp committee that you have to deal with. Whereas if you're an IC, you're usually going just to your recruiter, and that's probably your point of contact. They have to go maybe behind the scenes to a comp committee, HR director, someone like that to be able to get approvals depending on the stage of the company. Executives also need to negotiate many more items than just your typical base bonus. I talked about a few of these and I'm going to go into more detail on them. Some key ones here: severance. We've been able to get up to 24 months of severance, 12 months of severance, 6 to 18 months is a typical one. Sign-on bonuses are a big lever for people, but if you're an early stage startup, sign-on bonuses are harder because they don't have cash, especially if they're like Series A, B, or maybe even seed stage. And so we instead go for things like retention bonuses or milestone bonuses. Milestone pay is one of the biggest creative cash ways to get more compensation at a Series A, B, C startup where typically your equity is all illiquid and it's probably going to be illiquid for 5 to 10 years. What that means specifically is you get a dollar or percentage amount based on targets like revenue targets, ACV. If you're unlocking partnerships, it could be on launches if you're in the engineering space. It could also be on a fundraise round. So they're like, we'll raise our Series B or C in like 6 to 8 months based on the work that you're going to do, or 12 months based on the work you're going to do. Okay, great. Then I expect, this increase, this cash bonus at that time, this extra equity grant, whatever it is. And those are creative ways for you to get extra comp and especially extra cash when you go to startups. Title scope is a big one. Change in control is a huge one. A lot of companies, if you don't have a change in control clause and a company comes in maybe 12 to 18 months after you join and they acquire the company, you have your vested stock, but they might decide we're going a completely different direction. You helped get to that acquisition point, but now your skill set isn't aligned with the new company that acquired you. And so they let you go. You lose all your unvested stock. But if you have a change of control clause, you can get extra severance in that case. And you can also get all your unvested equity accelerated in the case that you get laid off. And if you're a really great candidate, you can even not have to wait till you get laid off. You can have single trigger change of control clauses, which means they acquire the company, you immediately get all your equity vested right away and get to cash it all out because obviously there was an acquisition. And so that change in control clause can be a big thing. And that's one of the most easy things to negotiate. We found when you're at bigger companies, public companies, FAANG, et cetera, then there are other things that you want to go for. Title and scope is one, but there's also things like relocation bonuses, paying for your kids' education and special care. That is a huge one that I've seen with executives at the more legacy type companies. You can also go for being remote in a company that says they're quote unquote 100% in person. So 3 different types of companies. We talked about this a little bit, but public companies pay in liquid stock. They can cap your upside a little bit there. I would say that's probably overstated. Public company stock can go up a lot. And in fact, a lot of people's actually liquid compensation gains in the industry come from public company stock going up. Generally, you have bands that are more rigid. RSUs vest into actual real money, but most likely you'll be able to get refreshers when you're at this company. Private companies are less cash, obviously, and you have big lottery tickets. And I would say almost everybody overestimates exactly how probable it is that you're going to liquidate any or all of your cash, and that's going to increase, and you're going to be able to liquidate it. People assume it's like a 1 in 3 chance when it's usually like a 1 in 20 or 1 in 30 chance, even at bigger private companies. For example, if you go to ByteDance is a really solid company. They're probably going to give you liquid equity at some point, but they're one of the best companies for this. And even then, you have to wait like a year. Then you can only get a tender offer to they do a buybacks to liquidate some of your stock, but it's only up to 20% of your stock that you vested. Stripe is the only one that I've seen that really makes sure you liquidate all your equity every year. Almost all the other companies, like Anthropic is a huge company. And when things are going well and they raise a new round, they will do a tender offer for 20% of your stock if you've been there 2-3+ years. But for all the new employees, it might be years. And who knows what could happen with Anthropic, a huge scandal, something happens. We saw what happened with Windsurf when, they just kind of gutted that company and everything disappeared from under you. So you just have to make sure you protect yourself. And exercise windows, dilution risk, like all these things are things you should be considering when you're going into a VC-backed company. Private equity is a different kind of world. Private equity companies, there's 2 reasons private equity will buy a company. So Squarespace was a public company that was acquired by a private equity firm to turn them around and make their business more profitable, right? And the private equity company usually has a 5 to 7 year time frame to do this, and they usually expect a 2 to 4x return on their investment when it gets acquired. And so they want executives to come in who are very business minded. They will give you equity, but that equity has a different risk profile. So it doesn't have as much crazy 10x upside as the VC stuff, but it has a much more high probability of exiting at all. And sometimes you can even get things like profit share. They also give you much more cash opportunities and variable cash. Biggest trap that I see, the 90-day exercise window. You're employed for a bunch of time, and then you have 90 days to exercise. But if you negotiate a 5 to 10 year window, then even if you're employed for just a year, you get your first vest. You have 5 to 10 years to see how that company does before you put any cash down to decide whether I'm going to bet on this company and use my options. And I was able to do this. A lot of people I've known have been able to do this and take advantage of it. Because when you leave the company, you might not want to bet at the company in that time. Then you have 90 days to get all that cash while you're unemployed. It's a pretty rough deal. And that's why now a growing number, I think it's now 25% of startups that Carta looked at have more than the 90-day window. And that's all the way up to 10 years. Not going to talk about 83B elections, but essentially if you're really early stage at a company or you have early exercise rights, which is another thing you can negotiate for. This is if you have a bunch of cash and you're an executive, but essentially it's a way to optimize your tax gains over time. When you're an executive, the offer letter doesn't look the same in the end after you negotiate as when you're IC. There's way more things to look at. There's also things like director and operator insurance. If you're in the C-suite, you can really go after things like your non-compete clauses, which can be restrictive, even if you're in a place like San Francisco when you're an executive level, and you just have to make sure that you're really covered. Maybe you want to do things on the side, like side businesses and advisory work that you have carve-outs for. Title, reporting, scope, those things are really important as well. You are also negotiating a contract and you're not just accepting an offer. There's several stages in the negotiation process. The first stage is before the negotiation even happens, like starting from your very first recruiter call, right? They might ask you your compensation questions. And we talk about this. We have a whole video about it and a few recording workshops where we talk about how to handle salary expectation questions. We have a free guide that I'll link to. But essentially, at that point, unless they really pressure you and you won't move forward, it's usually best to just say, hey, this is too early in the process. I'm just focused on fit right now, but I'm sure we'll come to something later in the process. And during that interview process, by the way, especially as an executive or a leader, you want to make sure that you have a side channel communication with the hiring manager and maybe even sometimes the skip. So between rounds, you're texting them saying, hey, like things were great, or I have this question, or maybe you jump on a call to debrief. The more you have that emotional connection with them, the less likely you are later to come in second place and have silver medal syndrome, which happens a lot in this job market. But you're going to have less pushback from them, more support from them when the negotiation time comes. But let's say you already got the offer, like it's right at the offer stage now. So on the offer call, a lot of candidates will react and start negotiating right on that call. So for example, the other side will be like, you have this offer, it's 300K base plus 35% bonus plus, X million equity or whatever. And then you're like, oh, that doesn't sound great. And immediately you've negotiated. By saying, I don't know about that, or even making a face, you started a negotiation, but you haven't prepared. You haven't gotten all the clarifying details. You haven't talked to anyone about it. And you haven't built advocacy behind the scenes with other people in the company to set your case. And that is the worst thing to do, because you might say things in that conversation that either is a counter. So you might say, oh, what about sign-on? Or I'm not sure about the space. And they might give you something back and then you accept it. And now you've completely tanked your ability later to go way above that or ask for other things that are more important to you. So offer call is one of the next stages. Then we do something called the advocacy stage. So most people skip this, and it makes much more likely that you're going to get outcomes. So everybody has a friend who said, oh, I just emailed them, hey, this is what I wanted and I got this. Or, hey, I had this competing offer and I got this. Yeah, that happens. And I hear these stories all the time. But that's like 1 out of 10 times, 1 out of 5 times that will work. We want a strategy that's going to work for you, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, 9 out of 10 times. And so this is why it's important to do the advocacy stage, which is you want to build champions, specifically the hiring manager, maybe the skip manager, and occasionally someone else in the company, but it's usually those two, or at least the hiring manager, to go to bat for you. It's also an opportunity to reset expectations, maybe even ask for a level up, which is not something you want to do with the recruiter. A level change is something that the hiring manager or the skip is going to be able to enable. How this works. We put together what's called a role vision doc. So in the offer call, you're going to say, I want to ask some questions of the hiring manager before I react to the offer. So you get a call with the hiring manager and you put this doc together. There's a whole template for it with instructions free. If you go to feelvalued.co/rolevisiondoc, all one word, you'll be able to copy the template and use it. Essentially, in this doc, you have what your role's vision is, what your objectives are, how that rolls up to the company's critical priorities, specifically your hiring manager or skip's critical priorities. Then have whatever your goals are. And it can be anything from you have questions about it because it's an alignment document, all the way to what it is and you're clarifying it. And then you have priority topics. So the first topic is usually figuring out what the priorities are. The second topic is usually about like what other things that you want to improve in the company culturally, et cetera. How can I be your right-hand person on the ground? And then some due diligence topics. Like, am I going to get the actual resources? Is this the scope that we actually said it was? What is going to get in our way here? What are the risk factors? Because you can actually use this not only to increase advocacy, but also to figure out, is this actually the role that you wanted? Then you have the impact plan, either a 90-day or a 6-month or a 9-month plan, depending on your role. The point of it is to write things on paper so that they know that you've heard them or interpreted what they want and put it on paper. And if there's any gaps, that's why you put it on paper. You're there to make sure that it's right. So if it's wrong, that's fine. But as long as you have it on paper and they see that you're taking that initiative, you're going to set yourself apart. So your future boss has to be fighting for you here. So what you want to make happen behind the scenes when you do a counteroffer is you want your hiring manager, who might be the CEO in the case of an executive, to go to the CEO and say, we need to get this person whatever they want. Like, this person's great. They're an investment. They're not just like another candidate. They're special for whatever reason. The CEO then will approve the package and then be able to go to the comp committee if it's a big company, for example, and will have more fodder there. They'll be able to say, this is a critical role. The hiring manager said so. They can't find anyone like this. This person is good for these reasons because they've done this before at X company and none of the other candidates have, even though they look great on paper. And that gives justification for the comp committee to be able to approve things, or for the founder to approve things and, get buy-in from the board and things like that. And you want to frame it as a partnership. You want to make sure that you're saying, we had a great conversation. This sounds like it's the impact that I'm looking for. Then if it's not the level you want, then you can say, it sounds though that this is actually a level for a VP title or an SVP title, not a VP, right? And so if we can get to that, then I'm sure we can make it work. The second thing, the more common thing, is if you're just asking for their advocacy behind the scenes while you work with HR, you just say, this looks like the role that has the impact that I was hoping for. Thank you for walking me through all this and clarifying all these things for me. I'm going to work with HR on the details of the offer, but I hope I can count on your advocacy behind the scenes. Or I'm sure your word will actually go a long way to helping this happen, especially if it's a big company. Don't assume the hiring manager is going to go to bat for you behind the scenes. Even the most savvy ones, they just get busy, they don't think about it, and then they hear later, oh, we gave them a low offer, or like weren't able to meet their ask and they rejected us. And he's like, oh, what the hell? You should have talked to me. So you want to prompt them, I hope I can count on your advocacy, to go behind the scenes and fight for you. This makes a big difference. Even if they say it doesn't make a difference, even if the recruiter shouts and says hiring manager doesn't do anything, even if the hiring manager says, I don't have any say in the comp committee stuff, at those exact companies, in those exact orgs, we work with a different person and it works, right? The worst that we've had is that it's neutral or a signal of how much you can negotiate your offer. Like, if the person is super cold during this interview, they're not going to be going to bat for you. So your aggression in your ask, your risk profile will change. If, however, they're like super excited, they're like, great, yeah, just tell me what you need. Then okay, I can make bigger asks and I'm going to have some buffer there and some support. Also, as an exec, you want to leave with value, not just market data. Market data is helpful in some cases. So for example, earlier stage startups just don't know what the benchmarks are, or they have the wrong benchmarks. So if you get an executive comp survey or PAVE and Carta data from a recruiter friend of yours, and you can actually have those benchmarks, that can be helpful. So you don't necessarily always have to have competing offers to do this. And in fact, most of our candidates don't have a competing offer on the table as a counter when they get some of the bigger increases, which we've talked about earlier. The exec counter script. So we'll talk about that later. The point is here that we also don't want to counter on one dimension, but you also don't want to overbloat your counter by asking for everything, right? You're like, hey, you just showed me a list of 8+ things, all with sub asks and things like that. Like, when do I ask for these things, right? That's very important. So protection clauses are some of the most important ones. And you want to ask for protection clauses unless it's the most high priority for you, you don't ask for them first. So number one, you ask for your total comp, right? Or total cash comp if you're in a startup and that's what you're optimizing for, whatever it is, or title, right? So you go like title, total comp / total cash comp, you figure that out. That's your first counter. Then they'll come back with an updated offer, and then you have some concession asks, right? So maybe to make up for the cash comp, you get a sign-on or retention bonus or milestone bonus, right? Things we talked about earlier. You don't know whether you need to ask for any of these things, because some of these things are standard executive terms in some companies. And so you get to do all that negotiation. You get to say a verbal yes. Then you ask for the employment agreement, the equity plan that's referred to in the employment agreement, and you ask questions about what are the policies for all these things. And we often do that in an email. In fact, we had a senior director at a Series D, a C or D startup recently. And all he did was send the email saying, hey, I'd love to see the equity plan. I had some questions about these executive terms, standard terms. What is the change of control? What happens in the case of a change of control? What is the exercise window upon separation? Is there any acceleration during that change of control? So they had exercise window, change of control, severance. Typically what happens is the company will come back and they'll say, hey, these are the answers to the questions, or look at the agreement, right? And you look at the agreement in the plan document and you find the answers to the questions. Then we send a second email that says, okay, I was surprised to see these things. So this is new information, means you can reopen the negotiation, even though you verbally accepted earlier, right? Because you didn't know that these terms weren't there. And you're like, okay, the standard should be 5 to 10 year exercise window, right? Like severance of 6 to 12 months. That one's a little less likely that you'll get in many cases, but something I would go for, especially if you're going from a big tech company to a startup. It's very easy to ask for that, just saying, I'm giving up a sure thing to go to take this big bet on you. Then if things don't work out, market conditions happen, the nature of startups, then I just want to be protected, right? But in any case, you make those asks after that. For this candidate, they just asked the questions of what they were. The company predicted that he was going to push for some of these things given that he was asking for them. So they proactively just responded saying, not with the answers, but saying, we're going to give you a 3-year exercise window. We're going to give you a change of control clause with double trigger. We're going to give you the severance, right? They just gave it to him without him even asking for it. So pretty easy thing to ask for sometimes. On the other hand, many companies are uneducated about these things. You'd be surprised how many big companies, especially the AI startups that are growing super fast, don't know about these things. So don't worry if they're like, hey, what does this mean? Or, oh, I have to talk to legal and HR. That's very common. It takes a little bit more time, but it's important to get these things locked in. And you just have to keep reassuring them, hey, these are just the standard things I was expecting. Like, look into it. A really great way to do this, especially if you're a higher level executive in these companies, is to say, this is something that most of the executives should want anyway. So it would be great. Let's put it in my contract, but you should consider giving this to everyone else, right? Which is very big for change in control. If you get acquired, doesn't the executive team want to get equity accelerated, even you, the founder or the hiring manager, if you're a CPO or a CMO or whatever? So those are things that I would definitely ask for. I wanted to go over some specific candidate client results because these stories have each something really unique to tell you. So first, we had this C-suite executive I was talking about, a Series B startup, and they had a 305K base, and they said essentially, this is very common at earlier stage startups, all executives have this base and not anymore. We have sometimes no bonus. In this case, they had a bonus of 10 to 20%. They said, this is the base. It's capped. Everyone, even the CEO gets this, and we're not going to make an exception. Pretty common thing to happen. But we were able to get the bonus tripled and set milestones in terms of ARR against that so that it would actually increase more. We were able to make sure it was a guaranteed bonus. So it's not, oh, we can give you half the bonus, right? So it was a guaranteed minimum on the bonus. We were able to get them more equity. We were able to get them the change of control clauses. We were able to give them a 10-year exercise window. On the sign-on, we were able to get them a little bit of that. Sometimes if they're cash strapped, you can get a retention. So after 12 months at the company or after we hit the Series F as a milestone bonus, I'll unlock another 100K or 50K. That's another way to do it, as well as an increase once we get that fundraise. And if that fundraise is over 50 million, then my comp will go from X to Y, right? That's another way to do it. And then a change of control was double trigger, as we another VP was a non-tech role. So this is kind of like a head of VP role at a big $10 billion plus AI startup that you might have actually used yourself. And essentially they were like, this is a Series D plus like 10 billion. It's a huge company, right? But the company didn't know much about this function and was still relatively immature in terms of like their age because they grew so fast. And so they gave them an initial offer, but we wanted to make sure that they had the budget to actually do the work because they're going to be the first person in this function. And they wanted to see like how much commitment I'm going to have. So in that advocacy call, they actually asked to make sure that they have at least $1 million in vendor budget to pay out for AI tools or agency work or whatever they need to do. They also got a really large increase in the compensation, equity, et cetera. They got all the controls, but there were some wins that were not in the offer letter. So they were able to get like a founding executive designation, like pretty much like this is a Series D company, but they were treated just like an executive, right? Even though they didn't have huge executive experience before. They got the vendor budget and they got to be able to report directly to the C-suite, right? Which was a big thing for them, as well as getting the VP title, even though they said they were a flat title company. Yeah, we talked about this. There was another thing here. A lot of people were wondering, like, how do I get promoted? One of the best ways to do it, honestly, is to get external offers at the higher level. That's just the reality. But sometimes you can get promoted, especially if you're at like a big company like Google or Meta. There's lots of other, it's not just can I get promoted in my own org. You can essentially apply to many of the other orgs in the company through networking or internal job posts or like getting execs that you like who may not be on your direct line path, who like working with you to refer you to a recruiter somewhere else in the company, and they'll find opportunities at the next level to do a diagonal. So you can do a team change plus an up level. And very often I've seen this happen, especially at the L7 to L8 level. When L8, which is director, L7 is like principal of staff, it's very hard sometimes to be able to make that leap within your own team, just because the org culture is such that they don't like making people into directors or there isn't a room available, that type of thing. One thing I didn't go into is some data sources here for executives, which I'd love to show you. This is a special one for the people who stuck around to the end. For executive comp data, it's hard sometimes to find it. Pave, Carta, it's like $6,000 a year. So what I usually do is go to my old friends who are recruiters at my last company and figure out like what benchmark tools do you have access to and get them to pull benchmarks for me. Or I go to an executive search firm recruiter who I've talked to in the past, or like I know works in this industry who isn't the one working with me on this role. And I say, hey, I have this role. I'd love to get your advice. They love being supportive because in the future, that means you trust them and maybe work with them if they reach out to you for another role in the future. And also, there's a bunch of comp surveys. There's one, Riviera, that they'll just give you the survey. They actually published it, I think, up until last year. And now you just have to ask them for it, ask a recruiter for it. They actually give you the whole survey. And there's one from Andreessen Horowitz that executive recruiters or HR people have exclusively, but some people will be able to pull that for you. Sometimes it's very hard to get data, especially at startups. So fairoffer.ai is an interesting site. It's not the most accurate, but they use interpolation instead of just where the data exists to get like some very unique splits, like for different roles that you wouldn't expect. Like, let me try to find a unique role here. So I'm looking for aerospace mechanical engineering or a support role at the senior solutions architect level in, let me go to a European, in Barbados, right? Super, super random, right? But they use interpolations of what they've seen as the typical differences between these companies to be able to give you data. It's not perfect, but if you can't find anything else, then that's a unique tool that I suggest looking at. Levels of FYI is great, but you just can't find it for your company sometimes, so just look for similar companies. H1B is a good way to find base data because like that's people with visas. They have to report what their base compensation is. Yeah, and Blind is a good forum, anonymous forum for employees. Exec compensation study is at feelvalued.co/exec-comp. And you can get a whole bunch of details about how to negotiate. And then if you go feelvalued.co/ what was it called? Salary-expectations-guide. You'll be able to see how to handle various different salary expectation questions and traps and things like that, and how to deflect, especially at startups. Take us through the steps to negotiate a title upgrade from the original job description. Yeah, so there's 2 times that you can kind of assess a title upgrade. I would do it at the very beginning. So you clarify what roles and levels am I being assessed for, and just verify that at the beginning. And then after you get the offer, when you ask them, okay, what went in when they're getting the offer, you just ask them, thanks, it says that the title is this, or like, can I confirm the title is this? What went into the decision for this title? Right? And then you have the advocacy call, just like I said. And during that call, you get them excited. You say, oh, this is going to have all this big impact. Here's all the things I'm going to do. Okay, it sounds from our discussion then, what you clarified, that this is going to have a huge impact in the scope. Well, that's great. That's exciting to me. But it sounds like this is going to be a VP title. Or you can say, yeah, my other offers are VP. That's fine. But that doesn't fully get them there some of the times. So one of the best ways that I've asked for a title increase is to say how the title, specifically if it's not level, but title, is going to help you get accomplished. So we had a senior product manager at, I think, a Series C or D startup, and they were like, hey, this sounds great, but this is not only like director scope. If I'm a senior PM title, I'm going to have less ability to get these things done efficiently. People are going to drag their feet. They're going to go over my head internally, and I'm going to have better sway with stakeholders, both internally and externally, to get things done with the director title. It's just the way it is in my experience, right? So if I get that director title, we're just going to be able to crush this. People are going to have a very clear sense of what the priorities are. They're going to know who to look to for these decisions, and I'm going to be able to help get done all these objectives, right? So that's how I would do it. And the manager in that case was like, hey, I'm going to get you that director title, because that was extremely intelligently articulated to me. That I have a quote somewhere from the Slack, a message that he sent me after that saying that. How to address equity questions for a potential recruiter that is making an offer. So they're asking for equity statements. So they're asking for proof of what your equity is at your current job. Okay, I see. Yeah. This happens sometimes, asking for proof. Our default here is we don't want that to be the industry standard. So just for the benefit of all, try to push back on that. And the way I push back is just saying, hey, I'm not comfortable sharing the exact statements, but this is what my vesting is going to be. If you either don't get what you want, or they dismiss you and say, no, I can't do it without proof, and you have the proof, then you can potentially give them like a screenshot or something like that from an equity portal or from Carta. But typically I don't want to give them that much detail. And just a couple of soft pushbacks usually works to get them to say, okay, cool, I trust you. I mean, at your level, like the fact that they're essentially insinuating that they don't trust you, like they don't believe you. And so you don't have to ask, oh, how dare you ask me something like that? But you just say, hey, I'm not comfortable sharing that, or I have an NDA. So for example, when I was getting that $1 million increase for that director, when we did that, the comp committee was like, I want to give you this stuff, but because it's so far above band, we have to have some evidence of what your other offers are, or what you're, and so we're able to, but those are rare. We try to avoid that at big extent.